Before we start, please make sure to like this video and hit this subscribe button so you never miss a story like this. And also comments where you are watching from, how many sons and daughters you have. Thanks. My name is Margaret Hayes, and I've lived long enough to know that some wounds don't fade with time, they grow sharper. People say you should never let anger win, that you should walk away before you say something you regret. But what do you do when someone else throws the first blow, literally, and it's not a stranger, not some thug on the street, but the man who promised to cherish your daughter for life? I can still feel the heat of that moment as if it happened 5 minutes ago instead of 10 years. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and bacon that morning. Sunlight was pouring through the blinds, but the air was thick with tension. Jack, my son-in-law, was pacing like a caged animal, his boots thumping the floor with every step. He had that look in his eyes, the one I'd seen before, where pride mixes with rage and boils over. "Stay out of this, Margaret," he barked, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. I was standing by the counter, hands gripping the edge just to keep them from shaking. "Stay out of it? Jack, she's my daughter. I will not stay silent while you..." "While I what?" He stepped closer, towering over me, his breath heavy with last night's whiskey. "While I remind her who runs this house? You think you can come in here, play the hero, and tell me how to treat my wife?" "She's not just your wife," I said, my voice trembling, but not with fear, with fury. "She's the woman I raised. And I will not watch you break her." He sneered, that ugly, crooked smile of someone who thinks they've already won. "Maybe if you'd done a better job raising her, she wouldn't be so weak." That was it. My hands flew from the counter, my voice rising without my permission. "Weak? She's strong enough to have put up with your temper for 5 years. Strong enough to keep this family fed while you drank away every paycheck. Don't you dare call her weak." His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd turn and storm out like he usually did. But then, in a flash so quick I barely registered it, his hand came up. The crack of skin against skin echoed through the room. My head snapped to the side, a sharp sting spreading across my cheek. For half a second, the world went silent. I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then my daughter screamed. "Jack!" Emily's voice was raw with shock as she rushed between us, her hands gripping my arms. "What is wrong with you?" He pointed at me, his chest heaving. "You tell your mother to stay out of my business, or I swear." "Or you'll do what?" I cut him off, my voice cold now, steady. "Hit me again? In my own house?" He scoffed, but there was something in his eyes, panic, maybe, that told me he hadn't expected me to stand my ground. "I'm leaving," he spat. "Good," I said, tasting copper in my mouth but refusing to wipe it away in front of him. "And don't you dare come back until you've learned the meaning of respect." His hand tightened on the doorknob, his body rigid. "Respect? You don't know the first thing about respect. You'll regret this, Margaret. Both of you will." And just like that, he slammed the door so hard the walls rattled, leaving the kitchen in a suffocating silence. I stood there, my cheek throbbing, my heart racing. Emily was crying quietly, her hands still clutching mine. I didn't cry. Not then. I'd learned a long time ago that tears in front of a bully are like blood in the water. But deep down, a part of me knew this wasn't the end. Jack wasn't the type to disappear quietly. And I was right, though I couldn't have imagined the way he'd come back, or the so-called gift he'd bring with him 10 years later. Time passed, but the memory didn't fade. The sting of that slap became something more, a reminder. A promise I made to myself that I'd never let him hurt my daughter again, not with his hands, not with his words, not with his lies. The years rolled on. We built our lives without him, learned to breathe again without his shadow hanging over us. Emily found her smile, my grandchildren found their laughter, and I found a kind of peace I didn't think was possible. But peace is fragile. And one afternoon, 10 years after he walked out of that kitchen, the sound of tires crunching on my driveway brought it all crashing back. Jack was standing there, older, but with that same smug expression I remembered. Only this time, he wasn't pacing or shouting. He was holding something, a large, carefully wrapped box with a shiny gold ribbon. His eyes locked on mine, and he smiled, slow and deliberate. "This is for you, Margaret," he said, his voice calm in a way that made my skin crawl. And in that moment, every muscle in my body told me the same thing: this wasn't just a gift. This was a message. I'll tell you what happened next, but you need to understand, sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes, it comes knocking, gift-wrapped and smiling, ready to tear your world apart all over again. So listen closely, because what happened after I opened that box changed everything. If you think a slap is where this story ends, you couldn't be more wrong. What was inside that box didn't just shock me, it split my family in two. Keep listening, because you won't believe what he brought back after all those years. They say you don't really know a person until they're under pressure. But I learned the hard way, you don't truly know someone until you've seen them at their ugliest. And Jack, well, his ugly came out in the middle of my kitchen on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't supposed to be like that. I'd woken up early to make breakfast for Emily and the kids, trying to give them a sense of normalcy in a home that had been feeling less and less like one. I had scrambled eggs in the pan, coffee brewing, the smell of toast drifting through the air. You'd think it was a picture-perfect morning. But all it takes is one spark to burn the whole thing down. Jack came down the stairs already scowling, his boots clumping against the hardwood. I could tell from the way he avoided my eyes that something had happened, either at work or in his head, and I was about to be the unlucky target. Emily trailed behind him, her hair still damp from the shower, holding her coffee like a shield. "What's this?" he said, gesturing at the table where I'd set plates for everyone. "Breakfast," I replied simply, turning the eggs so they wouldn't stick. "I didn't ask for breakfast," he shot back. "It's for the kids," I said, still facing the stove. "And for Emily. And yes, for you too, if you'd like to join." He let out a low, humorless laugh. "You think you run this house now, Margaret? Just because you're staying here a while?" "I'm here because Emily asked me to be," I said, finally turning to face him. "And because the kids need some stability." He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "What they need is for you to stop poisoning their heads against me." My hands clenched around the spatula. "No one needs to poison them against you, Jack. They see enough with their own eyes." His face darkened, that vein in his temple starting to pulse. "You've got a lot of nerve. And you've got a lot of pride," I replied. "But pride doesn't keep the lights on. Pride doesn't feed your family." Emily's voice trembled from behind him. "Jack, please, not in front of the kids." But he ignored her. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you, Margaret? Just because you've got a steady job, just because you can wave your precious paycheck around." "This isn't about me," I snapped. "It's about how you treat my daughter, how you come home drunk 3 nights a week, how you yell at those kids like they're soldiers instead of children." His jaw tightened, and I knew I'd hit the mark. "Say one more word," he growled, "and you'll regret it." I took a step forward. "Fine. You're a coward, Jack. A man who thinks strength is measured by the volume of his voice and the swing of his hand." That's when he slapped me. It wasn't a shove or a brush, it was a full, open-handed crack that sent me staggering back into the counter. My cheek burned instantly, and the room seemed to tilt. Emily gasped, the kids, God, the kids, froze at the table, their forks midair. For a second, I thought about grabbing my things and walking out. But then I saw Emily's face, pale and terrified, and I knew I couldn't leave her here with him. I straightened up slowly, locking eyes with him. "Get out." He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll regret this." And then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. That was the day everything changed. I didn't know it then, but that slap was the beginning of a long, ugly war, one that would go quiet for a decade before exploding back into our lives with one golden ribbon and a box I will never forget. 10 years is a long time to go without seeing someone who once lived under your roof. Long enough for the bruises to fade, for the anger to cool, for life to stitch itself into something that almost looks whole again. But some names, some faces, they never leave you. And when they come back, it's like no time has passed at all, every wound opens right where it left off. That Tuesday afternoon started out ordinary enough. The grandkids were sprawled on the living room floor doing homework, the smell of pot roast simmering in the slow cooker filled the air, and Emily was in the kitchen humming softly while chopping vegetables. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I'd fought for with every ounce of my being since Jack walked out. Then I heard it, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was the mail carrier, or one of the neighbors dropping by. But when I peeked through the curtain and saw the truck, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just any truck. It was his. The same dent on the back bumper. The same faded blue paint. And when the door opened, the man who stepped out was exactly who I feared it would be. Jack. I hadn't seen him in a decade, but there was no mistaking him. His hair was thinner now, streaked with gray. His frame had filled out, but not in a healthy way. He looked tired, worn, yet there was a swagger in his walk that hadn't changed. The kind that says, I own the ground I walk on, even when he doesn't. And in his hands, he carried a box. Not a cardboard box, but something heavy and polished, wrapped in shimmering gold paper with a deep red ribbon. He held it like it was worth more than the truck he drove in on. Emily came up behind me, peeking over my shoulder. Her breath caught. Mom, is that? Yes, I said, my voice low, my grip on the curtain tight. It's him. Before I could stop her, she opened the door. And just like that, he was standing in our doorway, smiling as if the last time we saw each other hadn't ended with him striking me. Margaret, he said smoothly, as if we were old friends. You look, well. I didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't invite him in. What do you want, Jack? He glanced at Emily, then back at me, his grin widening. I came to make things right. I brought a gift. He lifted the box slightly, the ribbon catching the light. Emily crossed her arms. You can't just show up after 10 years with a present and think. This isn't just a present, he cut in, his tone silky but with an edge underneath. It's an opportunity. For all of us. The grandkids had wandered into the hallway now, curious. Their little faces peeking from behind Emily's legs made my skin crawl. Jack's eyes lingered on them just a beat too long. Jack, you need to leave, I said firmly. But he didn't move. Instead, he took one slow step forward, holding the box out toward me. Open it, Margaret. Just open it, and I promise, you'll see I'm not the same man I was. Something about. His voice told me that wasn't a promise, it was a threat wrapped in gold paper. And I knew right then, whatever was inside that box was about to rip open wounds I'd worked 10 years to heal. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct in me screamed to shut the door, lock it, and never let that box, or the man holding it, cross my threshold. But Jack knew exactly what he was doing. He stood there, calm and steady, like a fisherman who knows the bait is too tempting for the fish to swim away. Emily's voice was brittle. Mom, don't. Why not? Jack said smoothly, his eyes flicking to her. Don't you want to see what I've been saving all these years? Don't you want to know what your mother means to me? I almost laughed. Saving all these years? He hadn't saved a dime when we knew him, couldn't save a marriage, couldn't save his own dignity. And yet here he was, talking like he'd been planning some grand gesture out of love. What's the catch? I asked, my voice like steel. No catch, he replied, though the corner of his mouth twitched in a way that told me there was always a catch with Jack. It's just, time to put the past behind us. I've done well for myself, Margaret. Very well. And I want to share that with my family. Family? I repeated, the word tasting bitter. You forfeited that title the day you raised your hand to me. His smile faltered for half a second. Just half a second. Then it was back, sharper this time. Maybe so. But 10 years changes a man. I didn't answer. I just held out my hands. Fine. Give me the box. He handed it over like it was sacred, his fingers brushing mine just long enough to make my skin crawl. The weight of it surprised me, heavier than it looked. The wrapping paper was thick, expensive, the kind you don't find at the dollar store. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Mom, please. But I was already pulling the ribbon loose. My fingers worked slowly, deliberately, because I knew Jack hated waiting. His eyes tracked every movement. You're going to like it, he said softly. I didn't answer. I peeled away the gold paper to reveal a wooden case, smooth and dark, the kind that looked like it belonged in an antique shop. It had a brass latch on the front, polished until it gleamed. The air in the room had changed, thicker, tighter. Even the kids, who didn't know the full story, could feel it. I flipped the latch. The lid lifted with a faint creak, and inside, nestled in black velvet, was something that made the breath catch in my throat. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't money. It was. Jack's voice cut through my shock. Now you see, he said, leaning forward just slightly. Now you know why I'm here. And in that instant, I realized this wasn't a gift at all. It was leverage. Inside that velvet-lined box lay a stack of photographs, old, worn, but preserved with a kind of obsessive care. On top of the pile was one that made my knees nearly give out. It was Emily, my Emily, barely 19, holding a baby in her arms, but it wasn't either of my grandchildren. She was in a hospital gown, her hair matted, her face pale and exhausted. And standing beside her in the photo, smiling with an arm draped around her shoulder, was Jack. I gripped the edges of the box tighter, my voice low and shaking. What is this? Jack's eyes glittered like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. That, he said slowly, is the truth you've been keeping from your own family. Emily's face had gone completely still, all the color draining from it. Jack, where did you get these? Where do you think? He replied, almost smug. I was there. I turned to her, my mind spinning. Emily, what is he talking about? She swallowed hard, her gaze darting between me and the children still peeking from the hallway. Mom, there was, before the kids you know now, there was another. My throat closed up. I had no idea. Not a single clue. She'd never told me about this baby. Jack stepped closer, his voice smooth as honey but dripping with venom. She gave the child up for adoption. And your dear mother, he gestured toward me, never knew. Until now. Emily's hands were trembling. It wasn't like that, Mom. Oh, it's exactly like that, Jack interrupted. And the best part? I found him. I know where he is. And guess what? He's grown up into a fine young man. You'd be amazed at how much he looks like. Stop, Emily snapped, her voice breaking. Just stop. But Jack wasn't done. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. I brought you these photos as a gift, Margaret. A gift, or a weapon. Depends on how you want to play it. My stomach turned. Why now? Why after all these years? He smiled, slow and deliberate. Because I need something from you. And I know you'll give it to me, if you want to keep your precious family from tearing itself apart. Emily's breath hitched. You're blackmailing us. Not blackmail, he said with a shrug. Just, a fair exchange. You help me, I keep the past in the past. You refuse, his eyes flicked toward the kids in the hallway. And I make sure everyone knows the whole story. And right there, holding that box, I realized the slap from 10 years ago was nothing compared to the blow he'd just delivered. Jack thought he had me cornered. He stood there in my living room, smug as ever, holding the kind of secret that could shatter a family. 10 years hadn't softened him, it had sharpened him into something colder, more dangerous. But here's the thing about people like Jack, they always underestimate the quiet ones. They mistake dignity for weakness, patience for fear. And they forget. I've been through worse storms than him. I closed the box slowly, my hand steady now. So let me get this straight, I said. You show up after a decade, slap a bow on a threat, and expect me to jump at your command? Jack smirked. That's one way to put it. Emily's eyes were wet, her voice shaking. Mom, maybe. No, I said firmly, without looking at her. We're not negotiating with someone who uses people's pain as currency. Jack chuckled under his breath. Oh, you'll negotiate. Because you can't risk losing your daughter. Not again. That's when I let the silence hang just long enough to make him lean in. Funny thing, Jack, I said softly. I might not have known about that baby back then, but I've known about you for a very long time. His brow furrowed. What are you talking about? I walked to the drawer in the hall table and pulled out a small, worn folder. You're not the only one who knows how to collect information. Emily looked confused. Jack looked nervous. I opened the folder and slid out a stack of papers, dropping them on the coffee table. These, I said, are copies of every report, every unpaid debt, every arrest you thought no one knew about since you left. DUIs. Fraud charges. Oh, and that little stint in county jail 5 years ago? I've got all of it. Jack's face tightened. You've been spying on me? No, I said, my voice like steel. I've been protecting my family. I knew you'd come back someday. Men like you always do. And I promised myself that when you did, I'd be ready. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. If you so much as breathe this story to anyone, those files go to the police, your boss, and every person you've ever tried to impress. And you and I both know, you won't survive that kind of exposure. For the first time in years, Jack didn't have a comeback. His mouth opened, then closed. The swagger in his stance faltered. I leaned in just enough for him to see I meant every word. You're not holding this family hostage, Jack. Not now. Not ever again. The room was dead silent except for the sound of his shallow breathing. Then, without a word, he picked up the box, turned on his heel, and walked out the door. Emily collapsed into a chair, her hands over her face. The kids scampered back into the living room, sensing the storm had passed. I stood there, watching his truck disappear down the road, feeling the weight of 10 years finally lift off my shoulders. I'd always thought the worst thing Jack had ever done was slap me that morning in the kitchen. But I was wrong. The worst thing he did was believe he could still control us after all this time. And the best thing I ever did was prove him wrong.